Okay, good evening, everyone. And thank you for joining us for our final installment of our Pre-Shavuot Aseret HaDibrot series, our final Schrier on Kibbud. As always, I want to thank our series sponsors, Jennifer and David Miller, who sponsor in memory of the yard site of Rachel Sharetz Allah Hashalom. I entitled our final Schrier, The Sandwich Generation, Practical Advice on Giving and Receiving Kibbud Av Va'im. Before we jump into any sources or any content, a few, or really a number of prefatory notes to tonight's Schrier. Of course, the term sandwich generation refers to those who are caring for adult children and elderly parents who are sandwiched between two generations. And it does present unique experiential challenges. I think I've spoken to many congregants. Many of our congregants here in B'nai Yeshurun fit into that category of the sandwich generation, whereby you are almost pulled in two different directions, or you feel like you're extending yourself in two different directions, each of which presents its own unique dynamics and challenges. And it can be uniquely challenging in that regard, insofar as you are both a child caring for a parent and a parent caring for a child, or perhaps navigating the complex dynamics of parent-child relationships with adult children. From a Kibbud Av Va'im standpoint, you find yourself in a certain sense both on the giving end and the receiving end, and both sometimes present challenges. Perhaps the giving end is very demanding. Perhaps on the receiving end, you feel like the relationships are not really where they should be from a Torah standpoint. And that's really what I want to navigate. We're going to talk about tonight about navigating the reception of Kibbud Av Va'im and the giving of Kibbud Av Va'im when you are in the middle of the sandwich, if you will. And our vantage point for tonight's Schrier will be precisely from that middle generation that is extended in both directions. Now, again, a number of prefatory notes. First, I really present tonight with a high degree of humility and self-awareness, particularly in recognizing that I am not part of the sandwich generation. I certainly am caring for children, but I have young children that also present its own unique challenges, but those are distinct from the challenges of caring for adult children, as the old expression goes. Little children, little problems, big children, big problems. So I realize that I am not navigating those dynamics with adult children, nor am I, Baruch Hashem, in a state where I'm caring for my parents either. I do joke with my parents all the time that recently, certainly in the last year, I'm getting like my first taste of the sandwich, and it's not a great taste of the sandwich. It's difficult. And again, I joke with my parents about that a lot, but Baruch Hashem, by and large, my parents are still at a state where they're entirely independent and Baruch Hashem, autonomous and able to take care of themselves. So I'm not really part of this phenomenon, and I really do want to call that out. I do recognize that I'm speaking largely from absorbed experience, from having addressed scenarios like this with many of you, but it's not something that I'm in the midst of myself. Number two, in addition to that qualification, I want to offer a second qualification and note that this is a very large topic with many, many features that we won't be discussing tonight. And it's really impossible to cover all of them within a single evening. To note some of the challenges that we will not be talking about tonight that really are core to this discussion. We really cannot claim to have any thorough discussion of this idea without talking about these things, which is why I'm telling you that this is not a thorough discussion. It's a much more narrow discussion. We're not going to be talking about, for example, the challenge of dementia, caring for parents with dementia, the unique challenges that poses, the unique emotional struggles that a child has watching a parent undergo cognitive decline. We will not talk about the unique challenges that occur with physical ailments, very different kind of challenges as opposed to mental decline when there's physical decline. The unique challenges of tending to needs, worrying about safety, etc. So one point that we will touch on briefly, but we're not going to talk about in depth, but it is quite core to this sandwich generation experience, is the sibling division of responsibility. That's a huge piece of this. Studies show that more often than not, the bulk of parental care falls on one person. There's always going to be one person who's going to be the quarterback. They are going to be the person who's taking most of it. And studies also show that it really does take a toll. To be sure, there is much reward to that person, both spiritually and experientially. But it also takes a toll physically, financially, psychologically. It can be very difficult. And it can create strain on relationships. So that's a major phenomenologically speaking, experientially speaking, that's a huge part of this. We're not going to talk about that in so much depth tonight. We're not going to talk about the burdens and limits of caring for parents. When is it too much or too far? When can I say no? And when I do say no, how should I say no? Again, we're going to touch on this a little bit, but that's another major theme that we're not going to go into great depth on. We're not going to talk about the major challenge of adult children who live at home. this new verb called adulting. What do we do when we have children who are adults but are perhaps not adulting, at least sufficiently by our standards? So all of these are unique scenarios and unique dynamics that need to be navigated in accordance with their own internal tensions and sensitivities and the like. And we're not going to do a deep dive into any one of these scenarios. And there are a whole host of other issues that can come up as well. What we are going to do is hopefully offer framework to think about these things in the most broad sense. And we will, at the end, discuss practical ramifications of this framework that I'm going to suggest. But again, I want to emphasize that we're not going to get into every single detail. And then finally, I want to point out one further qualifier, that even on the issues that we do discuss, I am not offering solutions. And I want to be very, very clear about that. I don't profess to have solutions. Phenomenologically, you could have all the ideas in your head that you want. You could believe them. You could have all the Torah clarity in the world. Very often, when you're in the thick of it and when you're dealing with it, it is very, very challenging. It's very, very hard. Again, I can say that on a very small level for myself, and I can certainly say that with confidence for many others. This stage of life and really trying your best to navigate the dynamics of Kibbud Avim with aging parents and adult children can be very, very difficult. I don't have a formula. If I had some kind of divine wisdom that I could offer you that makes this whole issue easy and go away, I would certainly share it. I'm not keeping any secrets. I don't really have solutions here, but hopefully at least talking about it together and trying to create some kind of broad framework for how to perceive it can at least be of some assistance. What I'm going to propose tonight is thinking about Kibbud Avim in two really different ways, two poles to think about Kibbud Avim, and that is what I will loosely call stature, point one, and autonomy, point two. And I will suggest that there's an inverse relationship between these two things, and particularly in the sandwich generation, there are certain opposite challenges, what my Rabbi might call, Rav Rosenzweig might call parallel opposite challenges, mirror image challenges that one is facing at the same time. Now, I'll flesh out what I mean by that, but before I do, I want to go through together a classic source tonight, which is a tshuva of the Maharik and Siman Kuf Samach Ba. And really, all the sources on the Mar Makoma sheet tonight, or almost all the sources, are really intended to kind of break down that tshuva, which we will walk through together. It's a very foundational tshuva, a very important tshuva within the realm of Kibbud Avim, both narrowly speaking, in terms of the issue the Maharik is presenting, and in terms of the broader principles that it identifies as well in the context of his halachic analysis. So we'll go through both together, and I will posit that it actually presents a powerful paradigm for us to think about the unique challenges of the sandwich generation. If you look at source number one, it's a source that we saw last week, and frankly, a number of the sources that we're going to see tonight, we already saw last week. Last week I already alluded to the fact that we're going to return to these sources, but focus on slightly different parts of them and analyze them from a different lens. In source number one, the Shulchan Aruch says, Talmud she'rosa lo lachas l'makom achar shehu boteach she'yira simin bracha b'talmudo l'harav shasham avim mocha bo l'pi she'doeg she'ba'oz ha'ir ov l'kochav ma'alilim eino tzarech l'shmo la'aviv baseh. So one scenario where a child is licensed to exercise their own personal autonomy rather than heeding the command or obeying the dictates of a parent is when they are convinced that going to a particular yeshiva and learning under a particular Rebbe will be instrumental in their spiritual growth. In that scenario, they are licensed to go to that yeshiva. And again, we explored the ramifications of that last week. What I want to focus on tonight is a comment of the Rambam. Son says, this woman is my bashert, she's my bas zivug, she's the love of my life. I'm convinced that HaKadosh Baruch Hu made this zivug himself. The parent says, no, for whatever reason, her father doesn't make enough money, or the yichus isn't good enough, or other concerns that a parent more legitimate concerns perhaps that a parent might have, that we don't see this being perfectly compatible. The child does not have to listen to his parent. Now, as I highlighted last week, it is always wise and prudent for a child to listen to their parent in the sense of absorbing what their parent says. Your parents love you, they're concerned about you, they probably have good insight into your personality. It behooves you to at least hear them out, understand what their concerns are before you just flippantly dismiss what they say and go forward. I don't think the Ramah, when he paskins that the child doesn't have to listen, means that the child should at least heed what his parents are saying, at least consider what his parents are saying, and internalize them and take it very seriously. But he's saying if he does all those things, he listens, he absorbs it, he takes it seriously, he considers all the factors at hand, and he still comes to the conclusion that this is the woman he wants to marry. In that scenario, he is licensed to go forward and marry this woman. What is the basis of the Ramah? In source number 2, you will see a tshuva of the Maharik, Siman Kov Samach Vav, where he poses precisely this question. Source number 2. You asked me about a case where a father, or you asked me whether a father is licensed to prevent his child from marrying a particular woman. It appears to me that if this is indeed a proper match, it's not, let's say, for simplicity's sake, for argument's sake, it's not a halachically prohibited match. It's not that the child is a kohen and wants to marry a grusha, or there's again some other halachic barrier to this marriage. If it's a proper shidduch, then the child does not have to listen. Why? What is the argument for the Maharik? Why does a child not have to listen to a parent? So he presents 3 arguments for why the child is licensed to go forward with the shidduch, and I think it is instructive to look into all 3 because I think they all have something to offer us. Now, I want to start. We're going to go a little bit out of order. All the sources here that are from the Tshuva of Maharik, source number 2, source number 5, source number 10, all of those are one contiguous passage in the Maharik. So I'm not picking and choosing passages from the Maharik. It's all one continuous passage. I interspersed it with other sources that will help us to better understand the Maharik's arguments. And rather than going sequentially in terms of the arguments that he presents, I actually want to begin with his second argument, because that is one that we already really touched on last week. So we're going to skip down to source number 6. We will circle back to source number 3 a little bit later, momentarily, but let's go to source number 6. Source number 6 is the Gemara Yevamos Daf Ham based on Rav Ben Aleph. We have seen it each of the last 3 weeks. That says that when a parent tells you to violate a Torah command, a parent tells you to do malacha on Shabbos, in that scenario, you are not required, really not even licensed, to listen to your parent. You're obligated to observe the Torah's command. Kulchem chayavin bichbodi. Shulchan Aruch in source number 7, paskin, like the Rambam, that this is even by a mitzvah midrabanan. Even if it's not a mitzvah midoraisa, you'll say, Kibbud Avim is a mitzvah midoraisa. It's a core mitzvah. It's part of the Aseret HaDibrot, and it's only going up against mitzvah midorabanan. Favor Kibbud Avim. Says the Shulchan Aruch, no. A parent is not licensed to tell a child to violate a Torah command. Is telling a child not to marry this particular woman, restricting them from their chosen spouse, is that violating a Torah command? Now, at face value, you'd say no. Number 1, is getting married a mitzvah min Torah? That itself is a major discussion among the Rishonim. Rambam counts it among his 613 mitzvahs. The Rush argues that marriage is not strictly speaking a mitzvah. It's really just a means towards having children, pru'avu. But even if you say that it is a mitzvah, who says that there's a mitzvah to marry this particular person? There are lots of other Jewish women that you can marry. So why would that be violating a Torah command? Maharik points out that it can actually be violation of the Torah command. What Torah command might it constitute violation of? V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Take a look at source number 8. I'm reviewing Amarav. Asur lo adam sheyikadesh es ha'isha ad sheyir eno. Shemayira b'davar megunav v'tiskane olav. Rachmana amar v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. The Gemara there, this is a classic Gemara at the beginning of the second parak of Kiddushin. It's talking about the institution called shlichus, the ability of someone to appoint a halachic agent to perform a mitzvah on my behalf. In theory, if I was very busy and I couldn't make it to my own chuppah, I could appoint someone and say, you know what, stand in for me. You're going to be there, the one who stands next to my soon-to-be wife, and the rabbi will give you the instructions, and you do the kiddushin on my behalf. It's not recommended. It's not a good idea. But in theory, the halacha says you can do such a thing. You can appoint a shliach. But the Gemara says you can't do so if you've never met the kala before yourself. You need to meet the kala because you know what? There's a mitzvah of Yahavta l'reacha kamocha. And what is the greatest instance in which most of us fulfill the mitzvah of Yahavta l'reacha kamocha? In the context of a spousal relationship. There's an obligation of ava in the context of a spousal relationship. And the Gemara says, if you've never met her before, there's a distinct possibility that you're going to marry each other. You're going to discover that you hate each other. You can't stand each other's presence. And then you're going to be in constant violation of V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. So there's an obligation to know each other in advance to make sure you're compatible in order to perform this mitzvah. Unless you think this is just a nice hashkafic flowery Gemara, this is paskined by the Shulchan Aruch. Source number 9. In theory, one can appoint a halachic agent to effect marriage on his behalf. In theory, he could just say, just go marry whoever you think might be a good idea. Just find someone and get married for me, or a particular woman. Instead of standing on the chuppah and saying Harayat Mikudeshes Li, the shliach is going to say Harayat Mikudeshes Le Mishalayach, to the person who sent me. That is going to be the kiddushin. Second line. He says that if you don't actually know that you are compatible, you don't have some sense that it's going to be an effective marriage, that you can build a loving home together, then you have violated the mitzvah. It is usher to do it, again, because of V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Now, I will note parenthetically that the halachic applications of V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha are quite interesting in the Gemara. The Gemara Sanhedrin has a very interesting application of V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, bror lo misa yafeh. In the context of Onshe Beis, there are lots of interesting applications of V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, but it is indeed a halacha. It's a mitzvah. It's a command. Accordingly, the Ma'arik says in source number 10. Turn to page 2. It appears to me that when the parent tells the child, you cannot marry this woman of your dreams, the parent is in essence commanding the child to violate a Torah command. Okay, so again, we're not going to get into all the nuances or details of that second line, but he says, third line of page 2, it is a command when you get married to seek a loving, healthy relationship. There are many instances when it comes to mitzvos b'drabanan, when there are opportunities, the Chachamim would create leniencies within the halacha in order to ensure that a man is attracted to his wife and vice versa, to ensure that there is this loving relationship between husband and wife. Fourth line. To close what he says in the second paragraph, he points out that according to the Torah, let's say a parent says, your parent, let's say you have a child, it's Reuven ben Yaakov. So Yaakov says, I have a big machlokas with someone. Who does Yaakov have a big machlokas with? Another Jew named Esav, for argument's sake. I have a big machlokas with Esav, and he commands his son, you can never ever speak to such a person because of my issues, whatever those issues may be, with said person. Says the Torah, that is not an instance where the child is obligated to listen to the command of the parent. Why? There's an Isra of lo sisna es achicha b'lvavecha. You're not supposed to harbor animosity towards any other Jew. And in that instance, you would be a license to talk to that person, at least for shalom. The post can point out that obviously you want to do so with chachma. If this person really does have a protracted machlokas with your parent, and if your parent has legitimate reason to be very upset at that person, it probably would be very silly to start inviting that person to have bracha achrisa at your child's chasana. So you need to use seichel, obviously, do it in a smart and savvy way. But the poskim say you are allowed to have a relationship with such a person. Says the Ma'arik, if that's true, then kal v'chomer v'menoshel kal v'chomer. When it comes to choosing a spouse, making sure that you have the right spouse, someone that you love, someone that you're capable of building, a lifetime of affection with, that is considered mitzvah. And the command of a parent not to marry that person is tantamount to a command to violate the Torah. So his first reason why you're allowed to marry is because of what we've seen to this point, this principle that a parent can't tell you to violate Torah. No, yeah.
More similar case of not speaking to someone if the father said you should marry this person, but to say you shouldn't marry this person, there are a lot of other women around. So why is that a violation of the Torah obligation?
I think the assumption in both is that it's a violation of Yahavta l'recha kamocha in some way or another. In other words, he really wants to marry, let's just play it out, right? He really wants to marry woman X. Because of his father's command, he's going to marry woman Y. And for the rest of his life, he's going to lament the fact that he wasn't able to marry woman X, right? So the point is, you're creating a scenario where Yahavta l'recha kamocha is going to be, there's going to be derelict, there's going to be some failure in terms of Yahavta l'recha in this scenario. Of course, if we just went with that piece of logic, then this psak of Ma'arik would be confined to cases where a parent commands a child to violate Torah command. And in that regard, this is not really a new principle in Kibbud Avim. It's really just a novel application of a principle that we've seen already. Again, from the very first week, we saw that there's this limitation in terms of commands to violate the Torah. And the chiddush of the Ma'arik in this argument is to apply it to this scenario where a parent tells a child not to marry a particular person. But it would be confined to that scenario. But the Ma'arik does present, as I alluded to at the outset, other reasons why the parent is not licensed to tell their child not to marry a particular spouse. Turn back to source number 3. In source number 3, the Gemara Kiddushin Daf Lamed Aleph Lamed Beis Amud Aleph poses the following question: Mi shel mi. You have an obligation to do Kibbud Avim, to clothe your parents, to feed your parents, to serve your parents. But the Gemara asks, who's obligated to foot the bill? Who's obligated to pay for all of this? Rabbi Yehuda Amar, mi shel ben. Rabbi Yehuda says, it's a mitzvah of Kibbud Avim, you have to pay for it. Nosson bar Oshia Amar, mi shel av. But Nosson bar Oshia says, it's really the parent's obligation to pay for everything. Your parent says to you, please, can you go to the grocery store and get me X, Y, and Z? Your mitzvah of Kibbud Avim dictates, yes, absolutely, I will happily get it for you, but it's okay, according to Rabbi Oshia, to say, and please give me your credit card so that I can properly pay for all of the groceries. The Gemara seems to conclude that fundamentally the obligation is from the father's money, not from that of the child. That is the halacha, and that is what is paskined by the Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch says, Zeh shema achilehu umashkehu mishal av be'emim yeshlam. If the parents have enough money to pay for their basic needs, then that is where the money should come from. If the parent doesn't have enough money, that's a whole different conversation. And then the child has to. The whole language of kopanoso is very interesting. We're not going to get into that right now. There's a further discussion later in this very seif in Shulchan Aruch as to whether that's part of your tzedakah obligation. Can I say that that's my mitzvah of tzedakah to provide for a parent, or no? Is that a separate obligation? Kibbud Avim and mitzvah tzedakah is entirely distinct. But in any event, we do fundamentally paskin that in the event that the parents do have funds and they can't pay for it, Kibbud Avim comes from the finances, comes from the bank account of the parents. And the Ma'arik uses this halacha in a creative way as well to talk about our case. Now, bear in mind, again, our case does not really have any overt discussion of finances. The parent is just telling the child, I don't want you to marry person X. This is not a debate about all the other components of the wedding, about the band and about the caterer and everything else. There's no money here. It's just a question of who you're going to marry. Yet the Ma'arik says that halacha has application here as well. Source number 5. Chada, mind you, in the actual Chuvah Ma'arik, this is the first reason why he gives for why the child does not need to listen. If you look at the end of the Gemara in Kiddushin that we just saw in source number 3, the Gemara seems to conclude that Kibbud Avim comes from the bank account of the parent. Every posting I've looked at, says the Ma'arik, paskins that the parent is obligated to bankroll the mitzvah of Kibbud Avim. And then he says the following in bold of source number 5. Kol shekein hachashu davar hashayach b'tzara degufa lehaniach ha'isha asher chavetz ba yitzarech lakachas isha acheres shel lo tiyasher be'ina kolkach. Says the Ma'arik, if I'm not obligated to pay my parents' grocery bill, then kal v'chomer v'menoshel kal v'chomer. when it comes to something that is much more dear and closer to my heart, and something that's much more what he called tzara de gufa, that would bring me personal anguish and pain if I would listen to my parent, he says, then certainly in that circumstance, I don't have to listen. Marik doesn't quite put it in these terms, but just put a dollar amount on each of these things. How much is the grocery bill? I don't know. Maybe it depends on where you shop. But for argument's sake, let's say it's $100 for a small grocery run that you're doing for your parents. $100. And how much would you be willing to pay in order to marry the woman of your dreams, who you feel like is going to, again, is your bashert and your bazivug, and who you're intended to be with and build a family with? What? That's less than the run to the grocery store? Doesn't matter. That's something that's so much deeper and more profound and so much more personal than just the question of who's financing things. So says the Maharik, if a parent has to pay for the basics of Kibbud Av V'Em, then Kal V'chomer, when it comes to something that I would pay way more for, that's way more meaningful, way more personal, then I will be licensed to exercise my own autonomy rather than deferring to the dictates or the command of a parent. So that is the first argument of the Maharik. Now here, we have slightly wider scope and application. We said that the first argument, really his second argument, but what we saw first, says that a parent can't command a child to violate Torah command. Great. Here we're saying there's a very severe cost. There's a very significant cost, tzara de gufa, then that is not within the parameters of Kibbud Av V'Em as well. How exactly do you find significant tzara de gufa? You have to be very careful there. Sometimes Kibbud Av V'Em does require us to go very far, and sometimes it is quite challenging. But if it's something that's a real tzara de gufa, if it's something that's quite extreme, then the Maharik says, once you've entered that category, you no longer have to observe a parent's command. So that is argument number 2 for this particular scenario, but one that I would suggest has much wider application than the first argument that we saw. If the first argument that we saw is just application of a principle that we saw already, this is a new principle. When there's significant tzara de gufa, there's license for a child to disobey. And then comes the third argument that is perhaps the most novel and has the widest application and most importance for us tonight. Turn to source number 11. In source number 11, the Gemara Kiddushin Daf Lamed Aleph attempts to define the basic command of Kibbud Av V'Em. Hanu Rabbanon, Ezehu Mora ve'Ezehu Kibbud. What is Mora? Mora is often translated as fear of one's parents, but fear is not really the right word. It's a kind of reverence. In the context of Yiras Hashem, the Rambam says, Yiras Hashem is not just fear of being punished. Other Rishonim think it's fear of being punished, but the Rambam doesn't say that. It's a kind of like reverence or awe of Hashem. And lahavdil, or as we suggested 2 weeks ago, maybe not so lahavdil. In the context of parents, you have that similar obligation of ish imo ve'aviv tira'u. You have this reverence or awe of parents. So that's one mitzvah. And then, of course, you have kavedas avicha ve'esim mitzvah to honor your parents. The Gemara asks, what is each of these mitzvahs? What is mora? What is kavod? Mora, the Gemara answers in source number 11, lo omei bimkomo v'lo yoshe bimkomo. You shouldn't stand in the designated spot of a parent. You shouldn't sit in your parent's seat. If your parent has a particular seat at the Shabbos table, you don't just cavalierly go sit in that seat. You don't contradict something that your parent says. You disagree, you keep quiet. Maybe you have a private conversation, but you're not going to just contradict what your parent says. Rashi explains that if you have a parent who's a Talmud Chacham, a Torah scholar, and they have a machlokas with another Torah scholar, you're not going to side with the other Torah scholar over your parent. Again, each of these need to be properly defined. We do have instances where great Talmidei Chachamim will actually engage in halachic discourse and even disagreements with a parent, but those are the basic obligations for Mora. What is kavod? Second line. Kibbud, ma'achil umashka, malbish umachase, machnes umotzi. A very powerful triad of obligations that we'll return to, but you feed and you provide drink. Malbish and machasa, you properly clothe and cover them. Machnes umotzi, you escort them out and back in. That is covered. What is not, notoriously not, on this list of Mora and Kavod? Marik points out, you look at this list, and you will not find any indication that you have to listen to every single thing that your parents tell you. It doesn't say l'shmo l'chol dvarav. to do or lasos, kol ma shetziveu. There's no language in the Gemara that implies that Kibbud Av V'Em entails listening to every single command that your parents give you in every context. Source number 12. I'm going to give you one final reason why the child is licensed to disobey in this case. Ta'ad kan lo miflagi, im mishal ab, im mishal ben. The whole machlokas about whose bank account you use, it's only Ella, bold of source 12, b'davar d'shayach ha'av b'gava, parnosas ha'av, shetzorech guf ha'av v'kiyum. The whole machlokas is about matters pertaining to Kibbud Av V'Em. And what is Kibbud Av V'Em? Attending to the personal needs of a parent. That is a child's obligation. Second line, second word, source number 12. But if it's not something that's personal to the needs of the parent, like our scenario where the parent is telling the child what to do with the child's life, the parent is not offering instruction on how to properly care for the parent. It appears to me, he says, that the parent has no authority to instruct the child what to do. Lo mishum kibbud, lo mishum mora. This is not within the framework of kabedas avicha ve'esimecha, nor is it within the framework of ish imo ve'aviv tirau. This is simply not pertinent to the obligation of kibbud av v'em or mora av v'em. Third line. To lo shaya kavod elakagon ma'achila mashkeho malbisha manila. What is kavod? Attending to the needs of the parent. Again, food, drink, clothes, etc. Mora lo yesha b'mkomav lo soser estvarav v'chein kiyotze b'zeh d'shayach la'av. He says, similarly, when it comes to Mora, you should listen to your parent and exhibit these outward signs of reverence for a parent in the context of caring for them. Aval b'milso de lo shayach ha'av b'gava pshita de'ein koach ha'av limchos b'yad v'nau. When it comes to something that doesn't pertain to the parent directly, the parent simply has no autonomy and authority. And if you look at the last line, he says, last line, he says, because of all the above, it appears clear that Kibbud Av V'Em does not require the child to listen to a parent when it comes to choosing a wife. Now, I will point out just an interesting parenthetical, that this is not the entire tshuva. You'll notice the ellipsis at the end. The actual original instance of the tshuva was a case where the child actually took a shvuah. They took an oath minat Torah that they would not marry anyone without approval and license from their parent. So in the actual tshuva, the Maharik says, it's usher for you to marry this woman, not because of Kibbud Av V'Em, but because you took an oath. It was I don't know if that was a wise move. It might have been a boneheaded move to do that. But because you took the oath, he says, you actually have to listen to your parent and observe what they said. But in the context of Kibbud Av V'Em, he says, in an ordinary scenario where no one's picking up a sefer and taking a biblical oath, taking a shvuah midoraisa b'nekitas chayvetz, in that scenario, you wouldn't have to observe. Now, this last yesod of the Maharik is by far the most sweeping of the three arguments that we saw. Number one, don't violate a Torah command. Great, okay, we already saw that in the Gemara Yevamos. Number two, when there's significant sa'ara dekufa, when there's really significant personal cost, I don't need to listen as well. Okay, that's probably a circumscribed, that's probably a limited license when it comes to Kibbud Av V'Em. This third principle is something much broader and much more sweeping. What is Kibbud Av V'Em? Properly attending to the needs of a parent and caring for a parent. But it does not restrict my own life autonomy, my own ability to make my own decisions. And here, I'm going to launch back into our opening discussion of the sandwich generation and the distinction between what I would call autonomy and status or respect. One of the things that I think is interesting about this sandwich generation challenge, phenomenologically speaking, is that in a certain sense, your two directional challenges, we'll call them, again, if sandwich generation is the middle generation, you're attending to children and you're attending to parents, is that you have two almost opposite phenomena transpiring at the same time. When it comes to dealing with children, you are dealing with diminished autonomy. Your children were young. At one point, all of us have total autonomy over our children. That is the natural way of things. That's the way things are supposed to go. When they're young, they're not sophisticated enough to make decisions for themselves. So we guide them, we make decisions for them, and slowly over time, they get older, they begin to take autonomy over certain small things. Perhaps we give them some measure of autonomy. And then They hit this point in their lives when it seems almost sudden at points. All of a sudden, they're autonomous adults capable of making decisions for themselves. And that diminished autonomy on part of the parent can be very challenging. At times, a child asserting their authority can be perceived as disrespect. And let's be straight. At times, it can be disrespectful when children assert their authority. At times, they use their greater authority to embrace divergent values from the values that we tried to instill. Children are not clones of ourselves. We do our best to hand over a certain set of values, but sometimes they embrace values that diverge from the values that we tried to teach them. And lots of times, it's not even disrespect of divergent values. It's just coming from a place of care and concern and the natural parental instinct to protect. Sometimes you see a child doing something and your greater life experience than your child, you know that this is not a good move. There are going to be consequences to this. You're going to pay for this down the road. And of course, the child dismisses their parents because that's what children do at a certain age. And they say, no, I know better. And you know that they don't know better. And you have more life experience and you've seen what's happened. And you're just trying to protect them from themselves. And yet they have autonomy at a certain point. They have the ability to make those decisions for themselves. The challenge is navigating diminished autonomy in the context of the parent-child relationship. Whereas on the other end, this same parent, who's this sandwich generation parent, who's also a child, faces an opposite challenge in the other direction. When caring for an elderly parent, often the child's autonomy increases in that regard. If with your children, you're navigating your own diminished autonomy, when caring for your parents, suddenly you're required to take on greater autonomy than you ever had to before. Now, I want to qualify. Often when it comes to elderly parents, we also need to remind ourselves that they are autonomous adults. And as much as we think we know what's best for them, we have to respect that at a certain point. But yes, in the parent-child relationship, at that point, the child ends up taking more autonomy over the lives of their parents. And that can be very difficult and very uncomfortable and very hard to navigate. How do I assert autonomy over a parent while preserving their dignity and respect? I think it's unsafe for them to drive. They insist that it's safe for them to drive. I know that I need to exert autonomy for their safety and the safety of others, but it's my parent. And how do I do that while preserving their proper honor and respect and dignity and the loving character of our relationship? How do I get my parents to do the things that really are best for them in accordance with the views of the experts, really by just any outsider would tell you it's best for them when they insist that it's not, when you encounter resistance. So you're dealing with these opposite challenges at the same time. The diminished autonomy from your in the context of your relationship with your children, and the new responsibility of added autonomy in your relationship with your parents. And the idea that I'd like to present tonight, and I can't tell you I have any makor that declares this, but Libi Omer Li, that it is the MS, is that when you have this change in autonomy, there needs to be an inverse change in what I would call status. What I mean by that is as follows. Turn to source number 13 for a moment. It's a source that we saw last week, and I said last week it's a source that we would return to tonight. Chai Adam says, "Kibbud hu b'machshava u'b'maisa u'b'dibur." What is kavod? It manifests in different ways, in thought, in speech, and in action. And he starts by saying the core of Kibbud Avim is machshava, the way we perceive our parents, the reverence that we have for them. Yes, everything else flows outwards from that, the way we speak to them, the actions that we take, but it starts with machshava. I would suggest to you that when a relationship in Maisa, the dynamics of our particular relationship changes, the machshava needs to adapt accordingly. What I mean by that is as follows. Let's begin with one's relationship with elderly parents. There are times when the dynamic of the relationship needs to change. And yes, you need to exert more autonomy. You need to assert more control for their benefit and for everyone around them. There are moments when that does happen. But I would suggest that precisely when you need to do that, it is critical and an obligation of Kibbud Avim that your Kibbud Avim b'machshava spike accordingly to make sure that precisely in the moment of tension, along the lines of what we were saying last week, precisely in moments of tension, it is most critical that your perception of Kibbud, of kavod, that your attempts to exhibit respect and honor and reverence, that it's raised accordingly. When we say that there are moments when you might, look, in halacha, there are moments when you might need to Communicate difficult truths to a parent. There are moments when, to use a paradigmatic example, you might need to take away the keys to the car. Again, I don't mean physically taking it away from them. That would certainly be inappropriate. But there might be a point when that conversation needs to take place. Precisely when that conversation needs to take place, there's no indication in the poskim that ever your kibbud avim b'machshava is relaxed accordingly. It's never relaxed. Quite to the contrary, I would suggest that you have to be more machmir on that element of kibbud avim precisely in the moments of tension where overtly, outwardly, you need to adopt this kind of confrontational stance in order to care for a parent. If you need to adopt greater autonomy, then you need to lessen yourself relative to your parent in terms of looking up to them and recognizing their great stature. And I think a similar dynamic exists with children. When we are the parent of adult children, to some degree, we need to relinquish control. We need to recognize at a certain point, they are their own adults and they need to make their own mistakes, even when we know that they are making mistakes. Life involves making mistakes and learning from them. And then maybe coming to the realization that Taka, your parents knew more than you initially thought that they did. But I think as we relinquish control, it's also fair to ask for greater respect. Not in terms of autonomy, but in terms of relationship. Let me try to demonstrate that by way of example. Let's just deal with a classic case. A child wants to make aliyah, and the parent is not so keen on that. I don't want you to take my grandchildren to Eretz Yisrael. I don't want you to go. So, of course, this gets into the dynamics of, as we discussed last week, the question of Torah command, the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. Let's leave all of that aside. I don't think a parent has any right to say, you can't make aliyah. I don't think a parent has a right to say that. And even if a child is not moving to Israel, even if they just want to move to a particular community, a parent doesn't have the license under Kibbud Avim, according to the Ma'arik, to say, you cannot move to a particular community. But I think a parent absolutely does have the right to be makbid on Kibbud Avim. A parent can say, I am going to miss you. I'm going to miss my grandchildren. And let's find a way to bridge the geographic distance in order to maintain that relationship. Baruch Hashem, we live in a technological age where there are many ways of doing that. And it is absolutely the parent's prerogative to say, look, I know that you are an autonomous person. You have the ability to make your own life decisions. But don't forget about me when you do so. And maintain the relationship when you do so. And in the context of that conversation, if I were being asked as a posek, if a child has a halachic obligation to go the extra mile in order to ensure Zoom calls with the grandchildren or added contact or whatever the case may be, a child has a halachic obligation to do so. That is kibbud avim. And again, I think if a child says, "Oh, I'm too busy to do that," I think they are violating a mitzvah min haTorah. The parent can't dictate to the child what to do with their life. But even as you acknowledge the child's autonomy, you can say, "Don't forget about me in the process." If there are concerns about a particular spouse, to go back to the Ma'arik's example, the Ma'arik says you can't say you are disallowed. You cannot marry them. Ma'arik says a parent doesn't have that authority. But I think the Ma'arik doesn't say this explicitly. I think a parent can say we have particular concerns that we want you to listen to and we want you to think about. Whatever those particular concerns may be about where you plan on living or what is your, to use a classic example that comes up all the time, what is your plan in terms of finances, in terms of providing for your children one day or providing for each other? A parent has the ability to say, look, you have the ability to make decisions in your life, but we're your parents. We care about you. We love you. And the ask that we have of you is you hear us out, you absorb what we are saying and give it thought. And again, in that scenario, I think a child has a basic obligation of kibbud avim to exhibit that basic respect. And that applies on the other side as well. When it comes to parents, like I said before, as autonomy increases, your kavod needs to increase also. That is not always easy. Sometimes it is dafka when you need to take on the greater autonomy that caregiving becomes very time-consuming, very emotionally consuming, very difficult, puts significant strain on the relationship, and it's really difficult to have that kibbud avim b'machshava, to think about your parents with great reverence. But I think that's what kibbud avim demands, striving to do so. And I think that is a paradigm that, like I said at the outset, it certainly doesn't solve anything in terms of practical observance of these mitzvos. But hopefully it does at least give us guidance. Let me try to offer what I think are a number of practical tips that are outgrowths of this general principle on the inverse relationship between autonomy and stature or autonomy and respect. Once again, they're not solutions, but they're ideas that I think do emerge from it. The first three all pertain to communication. In life, in any interpersonal relationship, in any interpersonal mitzvah, communication is always critical. Point number one, communicate affection. As the Chai Adam says, Kibbud can also be expressed b'dibur. When you are dealing with an adult child and there's some kind of tension, you want them to do X, they want to do Y, take the moment to articulate your parental love. I am your parent, and I love you, and I care about you. There is no maximum that a parent, number of times that a parent can say that to a child. It's dvarim she'ein lahem shiur. You can always express affection for a child. And when there is tension, call it. Make a point of it. Yes, your child might roll their eyes at a certain point. Say it anyway. I am your parent, I love you, and I care about you, and that is where this is coming from. And even if we disagree, that is always where this is coming from. In the context of dealing with an elderly parent, I think you could say the same thing. I am your child, and I love you, and I care about you. This is not about me trying to take away your independence, even if that is how it is perceived. It is about me just loving you and caring you and trying to care for you as best I possibly can. Say it explicitly. It's understood. Yes, it might be understood. It might not be understood, but either way, even if it is understood, just take the moment to say it overtly and explicitly. There's no maximum number of times that you can communicate affection to a parent or to a child. Second tip on communication, be purposeful in your communication. Plan communication. When you're having difficult conversations with a parent or child, don't just jump in and hope for the best. Don't just jump into a contentious issue and say, hey, wherever it goes, it goes. That is when conversations go off the rails, and that's when relationships become significantly frayed. You have to plan the who, the when, the where, and the how. Plan the setting. If there's a difficult conversation that needs to happen with a parent, who is the best person to have that conversation? If there's a group of siblings, who is the best person who's most equipped to have that conversation? What time of day is the parent at their best so that they're able to hear it? Where's the best place to have those difficult conversations? The who, when, and where is critical. And perhaps even more critical is the how. Here, I'll give you a personal example. My grandmother, she should live and be well. Some of you know her from Deerfield Beach. Kanai Nahara, she's 93 years old. She's mentally sharp. She has a ton of energy. She's great on, she loves using emojis and text messages. She's hilarious. Again, she's an amazing woman. And she's one of the treasures in my life. And she also does not walk very well. She has had multiple surgeries. She does not walk as well as she used to. And again, I don't think she would have any issue with me sharing that. She might disagree, but I will. She knows my feeling on it. So there are times when I will insist on walking next to her. Sidewalk is uneven. She's going up or down steps. When I'm there, I will insist on walking next to her. I'll link arms with her at times. I will walk right next to her. And we always have the same shit, the same back and forth that happens every single time. She first snaps at me and says, I don't need your help. I'm okay. That's what she'll tell me every time. And I will always turn to her and say the same thing. I will say, I know you don't need help. I just want to walk next to you. It's disarming. I'm not the most charming guy in the world, but when you say something like that, it's disarming. Does she need the help? Yes, she absolutely needs the help by every objective standard, and that's why I'm there. And she knows that I think that. And it's like, again, it's just a shtick. It's like this back and forth play that we have every single time. But just a little bit of thoughtful, planning for how exactly you're going to communicate the message can really go a long way. And then it's not this battle over how whether you need help or not, or how bad is the sidewalk, or how steep are the steps, or anything like that. Let me walk next to you. And that's it. It's disarming. When you're talking to a child, again, the how is so important. If you tell a child, you don't know the first thing about the real world, you don't know about finances, you're irresponsible, you don't know what the real world is like, that is not going to, in 99% of circumstances, a child is not going to say, oh, thank you so much, my parent. Thank you for sharing that with me. And now I really absorbed lessons about what it means to live life with my head screwed on tight. That's going to be perceived as condescending, and it's not going to be well received at all. Instead, you could say, do a favor for your father or for your mother who really worries about you very much. I know you haven't figured out. I love you. But do me a favor. I'm worried about you. So do me a favor and perform X, Y, or Z. It's a very different framing. It's the same ask. But very often, just the how we frame it can have a dramatic impact on how the conversation goes. A third tip on communication is listen. Don't just speak. Yes, there are disagreements. We might feel like we know everything that the other side has in mind or is going to say. But if we don't listen, you're not going to get anywhere. When dealing with adult children, if you don't listen, they are going to perceive it as not respecting them as adults, which frankly, sometimes we don't sufficiently respect them as adults if we're not willing to listen. And when it comes to elderly parents, it's the same thing. You know better now than your parents. You're not even willing to listen to what I have to say. It's critical to listen, not just to speak. It's critical to have patience. When it comes to parents, change is hard. Change is hard, particularly with age. Change is hard. Don't think that in the first conversation, you're going to communicate your message and all of a sudden they're going to accept it and everything is going to go your way. Sometimes it takes time. You have to plant the seed and give it a little time. Don't press it too much. And then speak about it again a week later at a regular cadence, whatever the case may be. With patience, you can achieve results. And children as well. Patience is necessary. Often with children, I'll speak for myself and many others I know as well. With life experience, you come around to the view that maybe your parents knew more than you initially thought they did. And at a young stage, you think that they don't know so much. But when a parent is patient and a child makes enough of their own mistakes, they realize that, you know what? Maybe my parent actually knew more than I thought when I was 17 or 19. With patience, often these relationships, often these tensions can resolve themselves. It's critical to build a team. It's critical to build a team. When dealing with children, it's essential for parents to be on the same team, for husband and wife to be on the same team. When dealing with elderly parents, it's very often siblings that have to work as a team. I will note that this feature can create significant challenges also. When not everyone is on the same page, that can make a difficult situation even more difficult. When parents have different approaches for dealing with a child, when siblings don't see eye to eye on best approaches for a parent, or as I alluded to before, when there is an uneven distribution of labor when it comes to caring for an elderly parent. Those can present significant challenges. But when you can build a cohesive team, your impact is multiplied dramatically. Sometimes the team involves third parties as well. A rabbi, a therapist, a physician. I will often tell parents, children, when they're navigating complicated relationships, I will tell them all the time, throw me under the bus. I am happy to be the sacrifice, the karban, if it means creating shalom bias in the family. Sometimes you need a quote unquote bad cop. So let somebody else, let a third party be the bad cop. Let the physician for an elderly parent or the rabbi, whatever the case may be. Sometimes having an effective team can make a dramatic difference. It's critical to care for yourself. You have to know your limits. You have to seek help for yourself when help is needed. And finally, it's critical to create positive moments and cherish them as well. Even when you're dealing with tension with a parent or child, find shared interests, create opportunities for connection, seek to create positive moments precisely in moments filled with tension. I want to close our series with this. The Torah offers a reward for Kibbud Avim. It says, "Kabedes avicha ve'esimecha, lema'an ya'arichon yamecha alu adama asher Hashem Elokecha nosein lach." That by honoring your parents, you will be given long life. Lema'an ya'arichon yamecha. There are lots of explanations for this idea of lema'an ya'arichon yamecha. What does it mean? Maybe it means literally Hashem will reward you with a long life. Or alternately, there's a celebrated Gemara at the end of Masech Skulin that suggests that it means not long life in this world, but long life in the next world. Maybe that's one explanation. There's some who offer like a milsa b'dichusa, a comical explanation. That's, why you're going to have a long life? Because if you take care of your parents, then your kids will take care of you. So that's why you're going to have ya'arichon yamecha, because they'll take care of you properly. And while that's often said in jest, I think it actually does reflect a deep truth. Perhaps the best way to earn respect from your children is to give respect in turn to your parents. I heard a really beautiful approach from Rabbi Rothwax. It was a great event, and I strongly recommend that you find it on YouTube. It was a Zoom event by the organization Ematai on caring for elderly parents, together with Rabbi Rothwax and mental health professionals. Rabbi Rothwax himself is also a mental health professional. But he suggested that perhaps arichos yamim is not just the number of days you have, but it's perspective on time. When you properly honor your parents, you have a new perspective on life, on what life means, and how each day can have a certain powerful impact. He noted that if you look at the examples of the Gemara Kiddushin of what is Kibbud, ma'achil u'mashke, malbish u'machasna, machnis u'motzi. You feed your parent, you provide drink, you clothe them, you take them out, and you bring them in. He suggested that all three examples are quite deliberate on part of the Gemara. What are these examples of? These are the examples of things that we do for our children. At one stage in life, our parents did all of these things for us. They fed us, they clothed us, they took us out, they brought us in. And then suddenly, Kibbud Avim kicks in at a certain point in life when the roles are reversed and we're providing those care back for our parents. It may seem less natural because a parent does that for a child, It may not have the same cuteness as a newborn baby and things like that, but perhaps what Chazal are trying to get us to recognize is there's a cycle here. There's a broader, almost parallelism in the course of life that the Torah is getting us to appreciate. All of a sudden, you have newfound appreciation and perspective for what life is all about and what time is all about. And I would suggest, if I can add one more approach of my own on the Ma'an Yarifun Yamacha, perhaps it's the length of a single moment. In the Yiratzon that we recite on Shabbos Mavartim, say the Shabbos, one of the things that we ask for is not just a healthy month and a good month and a month of bracha, etc., etc. What do we ask for? We ask for a month of arichos yamim. And many point out, how can you have a month of arichos yamim? It's either 29 days or 30 days. It doesn't get longer than that. What exactly is arichos yamim? I heard from my Rabbi Yisrael Kamenetsky, that sometimes a single moment can last much longer than a moment. A single moment can last a lifetime if it is the right kind of moment. That's the arichos yamim that we daven for at the beginning of a month, and perhaps that's the arichos yamim that is included in Kibbud Avayim as well. If I can step out of our discussion of a sandwich generation for a moment and give you an example from my experience. Rina and I have a favorite mashal for parenting young children. We saw it in an article somewhere, and we make reference to it all the time. Someone wrote that parenting young children, and it's a baseball example, so I hope you'll indulge me in the sports analogy. They said that parenting young children is like going to a baseball game of your favorite team, where your team is losing for 8.5 innings. And then in the bottom of the ninth, they storm back to win it all in a walk-off win. There's so much challenges with parenting young children. There's so much time and effort and changing diapers and engaged in all sorts of laborious shuttling back and forth, carpools and this and that. There's so much difficult work. But you know what? Every now and then, there's one of those moments that is so much more than a moment. It's one of those moments of arichos yamim. And then when you look back on the game, when you look back on it afterwards, it was the best experience ever. You loved that game because, again, it had that exciting, redeeming moment at the very end. You forget the fact that for 8.5 innings, it was a laborious experience. Whenever people tell us, cherish the moments when your kids are young, we're like, are you serious? Like, that's really this. What are you telling us to cherish? But that's precisely what's meant. When you have those moments, they redeem the entirety of the experience. And I would suggest that, even though that's a mashal that was given in the context of parenting young children, it exists within the sandwich generation as well. I think many will tell you that when caring for elderly parents, there are many, many, many challenges, but there are moments also that are such powerful moments. Moments when you can wind back the clock, when you can create relationship and create moments that you end up cherishing for the rest of your life. So that at a certain point, when you think back on your parents, those moments that you had at the end when caring for them are some of the most standout moments of the relationship, the moments that you really reflect upon. And certainly when it comes to dealing with adult children as well, dealing with adult children can be very, very challenging. But in those moments, when they make us proud, when they do something that just shows us what all the effort was for and what we invested in and what we created in a sense, those moments can also be moments that live a lifetime. We started by noting that Kibbud Avayim is like honoring Hashem himself. And I think honoring Hashem himself exists under a similar paradigm. Avodas Hashem is often very, very difficult. It's hard to keep all the laws of kashrus and all the laws of Shabbos, all the halachos that we have. But you know what? We have moments in our religious lives that redeem everything. They're so powerful and so meaningful that they are the anchor of everything else. And perhaps that's what the Torah means when it says, not necessarily that the number of days will be increased, but the quality of days, the experience that you will have in the context of the Kibbud Avayim relationship, that can last a lifetime. The bracha arichos yamim is not lots of days, but it is long-lasting days, moments that are deeply meaningful, and days that far transcend 24 hours in the profound impact they have on our lives. As we pursue the mitzvah of Kibbud Avayim with all its myriad challenges, may we merit that bracha promised to us by Hashem himself. L'ma'an ya'arichon yamacha. May we, our parents, our children, our grandparents, grandchildren, as the case may we all be zocheh too, arichos yamim, in good health, happiness, and the sacred relationships encapsulated in the fifth of our Aseret HaDibrot.